Saturday sunlight poured through the front windows of Maple Hollow Adoption Center, turning the lobby into an aquarium of motion. Balloons tugging at strings, paper signs taped to the glass, and families drifting from kennel to kennel as if they were browsing hope itself. The air smelled of sanitizer, cinnamon rolls, and dog. A door chime rang seconds, keeping time with laughter and the scrape of boots as kids pressed their faces to the plexiglass and begged for just one more. Volunteers in matching shirts moved like traffic guides, smiling, pointing, answering the same questions with practiced patience. Yes, he's good with cats. No, she's not a biter, she's just nervous. If you're interested, we can do a meet and greet. Somewhere near the back, a squeaky toy shrieked, and a chorus of barks answered, rising and falling in friendly waves. But in the last kennel on the left, half-shadowed, away from the balloon arch and the crowd, there was a dog who didn't add to the noise at all. He lay with his chin on his paws, broad shoulders still, coat touched with gray at the muzzle, eyes open and watchful like a lamp left on in a dark room. His card read, Retired Canine, Senior, Experienced Handler Preferred, and beneath it, in smaller print, a polite warning. May be selective, needs structure. People glanced, then kept walking, pulled by puppies with clumsy feet and eager kisses. The retired dog didn't plead. He just listened to the building breathe. Then the chime rang again, and a small figure stepped inside, trailing behind a woman who looked tired in the way of someone who never fully relaxes. The girl's coat was a little too big in the sleeves. Her hair pinned back neatly, her eyes scanning the room with a seriousness that didn't match the balloons. At first she moved like the rest, slow, cautious, taking it all in, until she reached the row where the retired police dog lay. Something in her body changed in a single beat, like a song cutting off mid-note. Her feet stopped, her breath caught. Her gaze locked on that last kennel as if the rest of the room had blurred away. The woman beside her kept talking, gentle, encouraging, until she realized the girl wasn't listening anymore. The girl took one step closer, then another, and then she was moving fast, weaving past knees and leashes and a stroller wheel, straight toward the quiet kennel as if pulled by a string only she could feel. "Honey, wait," the woman called. But the girl didn't. She dropped to her knees at the plexiglass, hands splayed, and the old K9 lifted his head in one smooth motion, ears pricking, eyes narrowing with a focus that made the air feel suddenly thinner. He rose, not frantic, not barking, just standing tall, and pressed his nose to the glass where her fingers trembled. The girl's face crumpled with relief so sudden it looked like pain. And she reached for the latch before she even thought about permission. Volunteer hurried over, smile ready, then faltering. "Sweetie, we can't. Let me," she began, gently catching the girl's wrist to pull her back. That was when the girl wrapped both arms around the dog through the open gap in the kennel door, clinging with a fierce, desperate strength that didn't belong to someone so small. The retired K9 didn't flinch. He leaned into her like he'd been waiting. The lobby noise kept going for one more heartbeat, then noticed itself and died. Even the barks seemed to fade. Faces turned. A father lowered his phone. A child stopped chewing a cinnamon roll. The volunteer froze, feeling the weight of the moment without understanding it. The girl buried her face against the dog's neck, inhaled like she was breathing air after being underwater, and whispered, voice shaking, "Don't take him. He's the one. He's the one who saved me." Earlier that morning, before the balloons were tied and the parking lot filled with minivans, Maple Hollow Adoption Center had been a quieter kind of place. Soft lit, half awake, with rain tapping steady patterns against the windows, like fingertips trying to get warm. The world outside was a smear of gray and wet asphalt. And inside the lobby, the lights hummed gently over polished linoleum, the air thick with the comforting scent of brewed coffee and the sharper bite of disinfectant that never quite left the building. Dawn shifts moved slower, voices lower, footsteps measured to avoid spooking the most anxious dogs. A volunteer named Marcy stood behind the front desk with a paper cup warming her hands, watching steam curl upward as she read the schedule for adoption day like a soldier checking a map. "We're going to be slammed by 10, she muttered, more to herself than anyone. Across the room, a young staffer was taping up a sign that read, "Find your forever," the letters slightly crooked. Somewhere down the hall, a washing machine thumped with damp blankets, and a radio in the break room played an old country song at a respectful volume. In the last kennel on the left, where the hallway narrowed and the ceiling light always flickered for a second before fully coming on, an older dog lay with a stillness that looked like discipline. His coat was sable, but time had threaded silver through his muzzle and above his eyes, giving him a permanent expression of weary intelligence. One ear carried a small notch near the tip, and a pale scar crossed the bridge of his nose. Thin as a pencil line, the kind of mark that didn't come from a backyard scuffle, but from work. His kennel card was clipped neatly to the metal bars. Ranger, retired K9, male, 9 years. Beneath it, in red marker, someone had written, "Low interest," and under that, the gentlest warning they could manage. Needs experienced home, working drive habits, may be protective. The label wasn't mean. It was just reality. People wanted puppies that wagged like windmills and seniors that melted into laps. Ranger didn't perform. He didn't spin or bounce when someone walked past. He watched, calculating distances and exits the way he'd been trained to do. His body a coiled calm that made casual adopters uneasy without them knowing why. "He's not a, 'Hey, I love everybody' dog," Marcy told the new volunteer, who was peering down the hall with curiosity. "He's professional, even now." The volunteer frowned. "So why's he here?" Marcy's mouth tightened at the question. She took a sip of coffee, eyes drifting toward that last kennel like she didn't want to look too long. "Handler passed," she said quietly. "A while back. Heart attack, they said. Ranger got bounced around after that. Couple attempts at placement. First family brought him back in 3 days. Said he stared at their windows all night like he was expecting someone to climb through. Second one lasted a month." Marcy exhaled, the kind of breath you let out when you've repeated something too many times. "They said he was too intense, too watchful, too ready." The new volunteer swallowed. "He bite anyone?" "Never," Marcy answered immediately, sharp with pride. "Not once. But he'll plant himself between you and a stranger without being told. He'll track a scent he shouldn't remember. He'll wake up from a dead sleep if a car door closes outside. People think they want a hero until they live with one." Down the hall, another staffer rolled a cart of leashes past Ranger's kennel and tried a cheerful voice. "Morning, big guy." Ranger didn't wag, didn't bark, didn't even shift his paws. He simply lifted his head and looked. Not at the cart, not at the staffer, but down the corridor toward the lobby entrance, eyes fixed like he was staring through walls. The staffer slowed, following his gaze. "What is it?" she asked, half joking. Ranger's ears tipped forward a fraction, and his chest rose in a silent inhale. No growl, no sound at all, just that unwavering stare at the door, as if the morning hadn't truly started until someone specific walked through it. By mid-morning, the rain had softened to a mist. And the door chime rang again with a gentler sound as a woman and a little girl stepped inside, bringing a draft of cool air with them that carried the smell of wet pavement and wool. The woman, early 30s, practical coat, eyes that scanned exits before decor, paused just long enough to wipe her shoes on the mat, then rested a steadying hand on the girl's shoulder. "We're just looking," she told the volunteer at the desk with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind worn by someone who had learned to keep conversations brief and intentions guarded. The girl stood half a step behind her, small for her age, posture straight in a way that suggested she'd been told to be brave more times than any child should. Her sweater sleeves were long and soft, the cuffs rolled once, and her fingers kept rubbing the fabric over and over, as if she were warming herself from the inside out, despite the comfortable heat of the building. She said, "Thank you," when a balloon was offered, and shook her head when a puppy yipped and lunged at the glass, her smile careful, practiced, as though she didn't want to encourage anything too loud. As they moved deeper into the shelter, the woman asked quiet, sensible questions. Ages, routines, what paperwork looked like. While the girl's attention drifted, her eyes lifting again and again toward the front windows, and then to the door, checking reflections, checking movement, checking for shapes that didn't belong. It wasn't fear exactly, not the wild kind. It was vigilance, the kind that settles into the bones when you've learned the world can change fast. A volunteer knelt to greet her, keeping her voice soft. "You can take your time," she said. "No rush today." The girl nodded, manners intact, but her fingers tightened on her sleeves, and she leaned subtly closer to her foster mom, like a sailor adjusting her balance. They passed rows of kennels where tails thumped and noses pressed eagerly forward, and the girl acknowledged each dog with a small nod, a whisper of hello, until a bark echoed sharp and sudden from somewhere behind them. She flinched, just a little, then mastered it, chin lifting again as if embarrassed by the reflex. "It's okay," the foster mom murmured, squeezing her shoulder. "You're safe." The words were meant to reassure, but the girl glanced over her shoulder anyway, eyes skimming the crowd that had begun to thicken, lingering on faces a beat too long, as though she were matching them against something stored in memory. "We don't have to get one today," the woman added gently, the subtext clear. Choice mattered here. "I know," the girl said, voice quiet but firm. And there was something in that firmness that hinted at a deeper resolve, a courage built not from confidence, but necessity. They turned down the left corridor, away from the balloon arch and the noise, and the air seemed to change there, cooler, calmer, the lights dimmer. The girl's steps slowed, her hand drifting from her sleeve to her foster mom's wrist, holding on. Halfway down the hall, she stopped without warning, like a compass needle snapping into place. The woman took 2 more steps before realizing she was alone, then turned back. "Sweetheart?" The girl didn't answer. Her gaze had locked onto the last kennel, where an older dog lay in stillness, head resting on his paws, eyes open and alert. Something invisible passed between them in that instant, something older than words. Down the hall, Ranger's ears lifted, not high and playful, but precise, attentive, his nostrils flaring as he drew in the air, every sense narrowing to a single thread. He didn't move toward the bars. He didn't bark. He simply rose to his feet with quiet intent, eyes fixed on the girl as if her scent had reached him before she ever spoke, as if the waiting was finally over. The farther down the corridor they went, the more the shelter's soundtrack sharpened. Kennels rattling, toenails skittering, eager barks ricocheting off concrete walls as dogs leapt up to make themselves seen. 100 hopeful auditions happening at once. Yet the retired K9 at the end remained the one quiet note in the whole loud song. The girl walked slowly, eyes moving from face to face behind the bars, offering small nods and soft smiles like she didn't want to disappoint anyone. And every few steps, a dog would pop up on hind legs, paws thumping the gate, tail whipping so hard it blurred, a volunteer laughing somewhere behind them. "Oh, he likes you." But the girl's attention kept slipping forward, pulled by something she couldn't name, until she reached the last kennel and the world seemed to narrow to a single rectangle of metal and shadow. Inside, the older dog, Ranger, shifted as if a command had been whispered directly into his bones. He didn't spring, he didn't scramble. He stood the way a professional stands when the radio crackles and the job begins, slow and controlled, weight balanced, eyes steady, muscles waking without panic. It was like watching a switch flip in complete silence. The girl's foster mom started to say something, some gentle warning about asking first, about keeping hands away from the latches. But the words evaporated the moment the girl stopped. Not a dramatic stop, not a playful pause, a full stop, as if her body had recognized a truth before her mind could catch up. Her lips parted, her shoulders rose with a sharp inhale. Her eyes, so careful and guarded moments ago, suddenly flooded, tears appearing with no permission and no explanation, like rain finding the lowest point. She blinked fast, almost angry at herself for it, and whispered, "No," even though nobody had said anything. Ranger held her gaze, and the corridor noise faded in a way that didn't feel natural, as if the building itself was leaning in to listen. The girl took one step closer, then another, and when she reached the bars, her knees gave out like she'd been holding herself upright with sheer willpower until that exact second. She dropped gently to the floor, palms on the cold concrete, and reached through the metal slats with fingers that trembled from more than excitement. She didn't grab. She didn't yank. She offered her hand like a promise. Ranger moved forward without hesitation, nose brushing her knuckles first, a quick assessment. Then he lowered his head, slow, deliberate, and pressed his forehead to hers, through the gap. The touch soft but absolute, like a seal stamped onto paper. The girl's breath hitched and turned into a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. And she closed her eyes as if the contact had anchored her in a world that kept trying to tilt. Her small hand slid up to the side of his face, fingertips finding the roughness of his fur, the faint ridge of an old scar, and she stroked once, twice, like she was checking that he was real. Ranger's eyes softened, but his posture stayed protective. His body angled subtly toward her foster mom and the corridor behind them. A quiet barrier formed without anyone asking him to. The foster mom stood frozen, hand half raised, uncertainty flickering across her face. This wasn't normal affection, not the casual awe moment families came for. This was recognition. A volunteer named Marcy, carrying a stack of clipboards, rounded the corner and slowed when she saw them, her expression shifting from routine to disbelief in a single beat. She looked from the girl's tear-streaked cheeks to Ranger's still, steady stance, then down at the kennel card with "low interest" scrawled in red like a joke somebody had told too early. Marcy's voice dropped to a whisper, as if she was afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the hall. "That dog," she murmured to the staffer beside her, eyes wide. "That dog never does that." The lobby beyond the corridor kept buzzing with Adoption Day cheer, but a different current slid through it. Quiet, watchful. Because even in a room full of families, there are eyes that aren't there for the dogs. Near the coffee table where donation jars sat beside half-eaten cinnamon rolls, a man stood with his hands loosely in his pockets, clean jacket zipped to the collar like he'd dressed for a brochure photo. Hair neat, face calm in a way that felt rehearsed. He smiled at a volunteer, nodded at a dad, let a toddler bump into his leg without flinching, and if you saw him for only a second, you'd think harmless, polite, local. The kind of man who could talk his way through a traffic stop and leave the officer feeling like they were the rude one. But he wasn't scanning kennel cards. He wasn't crouching down to meet dogs. His gaze kept drifting toward the left corridor, toward the dimmer hallway where the older canine's kennel sat at the end like a locked drawer nobody wanted opened. He watched without staring, the way a person watches when they've practiced not being noticed. Short looks, broken lines, pretending to be interested in posters while his eyes measured who was where. The foster mom, still standing half in the hallway, had felt it before she saw it. That old prickle at the back of the neck that says someone's attention has weight. She straightened, sliding one step closer to the girl on the floor, angling her body between the child and the open space behind them. It was subtle, protective, the way you turn your shoulder when a gust of wind hits. And for a moment her hand hovered over the girl's hair as if she could physically shield her from whatever was forming. When she looked out toward the lobby, her eyes found the man immediately. Too fast for it to be coincidence. And she held the gaze a fraction longer than politeness would allow. The man's smile widened, friendly on the surface. And then, as if a switch clicked in his head, he looked away with smooth timing, turning his attention to a rack of leashes he clearly had no intention of buying. It was the kind of look away that said, "I know you noticed, and I want you to know I can disappear in plain sight." The foster mom's stomach tightened. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, that adoption days pulled in all kinds, that paranoia had no place in a room with balloons. Yet her fingers flexed at her side, ready, and her voice came out too measured when she said, "Sweetheart, let's stand up, okay? We can ask to meet him properly." The girl didn't move. She stayed kneeling, forehead still pressed near Ranger's, her small hand cupping his cheek as if she was holding onto a memory that could slip away if she blinked. Ranger had been soft a second ago, still, calm, almost tender. But something changed in him the moment that man's presence aligned with the girl's scent and the foster mom's tension. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than dramatic. Ranger's ears tipped forward, then flattened just slightly as his body shifted into a posture that didn't belong to a shelter dog at all. His muscles locked under his coat like cables tightening. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply became immovable, a statue with intent, angling his shoulders so his frame covered more of the girl's small body without pushing her, like a shield assembling itself piece by piece. Marcy, still holding the clipboards, felt the change like a temperature drop. She followed Ranger's line of sight out into the lobby and saw the man in the clean jacket pretending to study a poster about spay and neuter. The foster mom saw it too, the way Ranger's gaze pinned him, the way the dog's stillness wasn't relaxation, but warning. And in that stretched, silent heartbeat, when the adoption center's cheerful noise seemed suddenly far away, Ranger's entire body went rigid, not with fear, but with professional certainty, as if some old command had returned to him with crystal clarity. Protect the vulnerable. Mark the threat. Do not let it get closer. From the far side of the lobby, where the noise of laughter and barking blended into something almost festive, a man lingered with no leash in his hands and no questions on his lips, standing just outside the flow like he'd chosen the spot for its sightlines rather than its comfort. His jacket was clean in a way that suggested it hadn't seen real work. No frayed cuffs, no rain-darkened seams, and his shoes were wiped carefully enough to leave only faint prints on the tile. He smiled easily at a passing volunteer, the expression warm and practiced, then laughed at something a couple said about shedding, nodding along as if he belonged to the moment. But his eyes betrayed him. They slid, paused, slid again, never settling on the dogs for more than a heartbeat, always drifting back to the left corridor where the light dimmed and the crowd thinned. From there he watched the girl kneeling by the last kennel, watched the way her shoulders shook as she pressed close to the retired canine, watched the foster mom hover nearby with tension tightening her jaw. He wasn't looking with curiosity. He was checking distance, angles, exits. The foster mom felt the gaze land like a hand on her spine, a sensation so familiar it made her chest constrict. She shifted without thinking, stepping closer to the girl, her stance widening just enough to block a straight line of sight from the lobby to the kennel. It was a protective reflex, subtle but absolute. And when she glanced up, her eyes found the man instantly, as if some quiet part of her had already circled him in red. For a fraction of a second, their gazes met. The man's smile held, friendly and unbothered, but something behind it sharpened, measuring. Then he looked away, too smoothly, too deliberately, turning to examine a wall of pamphlets with exaggerated interest, like he'd rehearsed that exact move in mirrors. The foster mom swallowed, pulse quickening, her hand hovering near the girl's shoulder as if she might need to pull her close in a single motion. Around them, the shelter kept moving, oblivious. A child squealed at a puppy, a balloon popped somewhere near the entrance. Volunteers laughed and clapped. Yet the air near the last kennel thickened, heavy with an unspoken shift. Ranger sensed it before any human named it. The warmth in his posture vanished, replaced by a precision that made Marcy's breath catch. His spine straightened, his head lifted a fraction higher. The easy closeness he'd allowed the girl turned into something more deliberate, his body angling so his bulk covered her small frame without jostling her. A living wall formed from instinct and training. His ears flattened just enough to change the line of his face, and his muscles hardened beneath his coat, every fiber alert and waiting. He did not bare teeth. He did not growl. He became still, so completely still that it felt louder than any bark. The girl felt it too, the sudden solidity at her side, and her fingers tightened in Ranger's fur, her eyes flicking up to his face in question. Ranger never looked down at her. His gaze remained fixed on the lobby, locked onto the man who pretended not to notice. Marcy followed that gaze and saw the man's reflection in the glass of a donation jar, saw the way his jaw clenched as if he'd felt the weight of it despite himself. "Hey," Marcy said softly to the foster mom, voice low. "You okay?" The foster mom nodded once, not trusting her voice, her instincts screaming that this was not coincidence, not curiosity. In the middle of balloons and adoption smiles, something old and dangerous had stepped into the room, and Ranger, retired, labeled low interest, written off as too intense, had recognized it instantly. He stood silent and unyielding, a warning carved from stillness, as if to say without words, "I see you. Do not come closer." The spell of that hallway moment didn't last long once the machinery of policy clicked into place, because institutions have a way of smoothing over anything that feels too real. Marcy approached with her clipboards held like a shield, her expression soft, but her tone slipping into the careful cadence of procedure. "Okay, honey," she said, crouching to the girl's level with a smile that tried to keep the air light. "I love that you feel connected. But we can't open kennels like that. Rules are rules." Another staffer appeared behind her. Corey, the weekend supervisor, already frowning as if trouble was a stain he had to wipe up quickly. "We have families out there," he murmured, casting a glance toward the lobby where the man in the clean jacket still lingered, pretending to read a pamphlet. "Let's not make it a scene." The foster mom's eyes narrowed at that phrase, because it wasn't a request for safety. It was a request for silence. "I didn't make a scene," she replied evenly, sliding one hand onto the girl's shoulder, grounding her. "She went to him. He went to her." Corey's smile came fast and flat. "Sure, it happens. Kids get emotional around animals." He reached for the kennel latch, intent on closing it. But Ranger shifted. Just a half step, placing his body between the latch and the girl without aggression, simply occupying the space with calm authority. Corey paused, reconsidering his angle. Marcy cleared her throat, trying again. "We can set up a meet-and-greet room," she offered, glancing at Ranger's posture with unease. "But not like this. We have protocols." "Fine," the foster mom said. "Protocols. Then I want his file." Corey blinked like he hadn't expected a foster parent to speak with that kind of certainty. "His file?" "His history," she repeated, voice still polite, but the politeness now sharpened into something that could cut. "Medical, behavioral notes, previous placements, handler information, everything." Corey's shoulders lifted in a small shrug, as if it were a hassle rather than a right. "He's a retired K-9. Those records can be complicated." "Complicated," the foster mom echoed, and the girl's hand tightened on Ranger's fur as if she understood what that word usually meant in adult mouths. Marcy stood and flipped through her clipboards, then led them toward the desk area with a briskness that felt like containment. In the office nook, beneath a corkboard covered in "Adopt Me" flyers, Marcy pulled a thin manila folder from a drawer. Thin was the first thing the foster mom noticed. Too thin for 9 years of a working dog's life. Too thin for a creature that had clearly been trained, deployed, and damaged in service. Marcy opened it and frowned in genuine confusion. "That's weird," she murmured, riffling pages. There were a couple vaccination sheets, a generic intake form, a brief note about high drive and need structure. But the sections where a retired K-9's service history should have been were either missing entirely or rendered useless by thick black marker slashes. Dates were blocked out. Agency names were scratched over. A page appeared to have been torn out cleanly, leaving only jagged holes along the binder edge. The foster mom's stomach dropped. "Who blacked this out?" she asked. Corey leaned in, then straightened quickly, eyes darting to the lobby again. "Standard privacy stuff," he said too fast. "You know, department policies." "Which department?" the foster mom pressed. Corey's jaw flexed. "Look, ma'am, he's here now. He's safe. We're doing our best. But we can't just hand over sensitive information because a child got attached." "She didn't get attached," the foster mom snapped before she could stop herself. Then softened her voice immediately when the girl looked up. "Sorry, I'm just saying, you're treating this like a normal adoption day moment. It isn't." Marcy tried to smooth it over, palms out. "Sometimes kids, especially kids in care, bond intensely. It's not unusual. Animals feel safe to them." Corey nodded, relieved to have an explanation that didn't require looking deeper. "Exactly. She's just emotional." The foster mom stared at the thin, redacted folder, the missing pieces screaming louder than any bark. Behind them, Ranger remained in the hallway, silent and watchful, his gaze tracking the lobby like a camera that never blinked. The man in the clean jacket shifted position near the coffee table, still there, still pretending. The foster mom felt her pulse in her throat. "I want a private room," she said. "Now." Corey opened his mouth to object, then caught something in Ranger's posture, something that made arguing feel unwise, and he gestured stiffly down the hall. "Meet and greet room. 10 minutes." They moved quickly, Marcy leading, Corey trailing, the foster mom keeping the girl close. Inside the small room, a couch sagged under old blankets, and a single lamp cast warm light that tried to make everything feel safe. Marcy brought Ranger in on a leash, but Ranger didn't pull toward the toys or the treats. He went straight to the girl and sat beside her, like a guard taking post. The foster mom knelt, searching the girl's face. "Honey," she said softly, "tell me why you ran to him. Do you know this dog?" The girl swallowed, eyes shining, and leaned into Ranger's ear as if the walls could listen. Her whisper was small, trembling, and it landed like a stone in the still water. "He stayed with me," she breathed, "when they told me not to make a sound." The foster mom's blood went cold. "Who told you that?" she asked, voice barely there. The girl pressed her forehead to Ranger's again and whispered the part that turned her foster mom's skin pale. "The bad man. He said if anyone found me, I'd disappear. But this dog found me first." The meet and greet room was meant to feel like a living room, but the longer the foster mom sat there, the more it felt like a waiting area outside a storm shelter. Too quiet, too contained, the air thick with things nobody wanted to say out loud. Ranger lay near the girl's feet, his body curved around her like a comma, the leash slack in Marcy's hand because there was no need to restrain him. He wasn't pacing, wasn't whining, wasn't begging for affection like most shelter dogs did in that room. He was simply present, anchored. The girl kept one hand on his neck as if she needed contact to keep her courage from dissolving, and her other hand worried the edge of her sleeve until the fabric warmed from friction. Marcy tried to keep her voice bright. "He seems to like you," she offered, as if this was all as simple as chemistry and temperament tests. Corey hovered near the door, arms folded, the kind of posture that said, "Let's wrap this up," while the foster mom's eyes kept flicking to the window, small, high, frosted, wondering who could see in from the hall. "Honey," she said gently, "when did this happen? When did he stay with you?" The girl hesitated, throat working, and Ranger's ears tipped toward her as if he could hear her heartbeat. "It was dark," she whispered. "It was raining. I was hiding. I thought I was gonna..." She stopped, swallowed hard. The foster mom's hand tightened around her own phone, not even realizing she'd grabbed it. "Okay," she said, voice steady by force. "Okay. We don't have to say more right now. You're safe." Ranger's head lifted a fraction, eyes narrowing toward the hallway beyond the door, and the foster mom followed his gaze instinctively. Nothing there. No footsteps. No voices. But Ranger's stillness had a purpose now, like a radar pinging something invisible. The girl leaned closer to him, pressing her cheek into the rough fur at his shoulder, and Ranger shifted just enough to make room, careful, deliberate, then nudged at the old blanket on the floor beside him with his nose. It wasn't random. It was targeted, a searching motion, like he knew there was something under there that mattered. Marcy frowned. "What's he doing?" Ranger nudged again, more insistent, and the blanket bunched up, exposing the corner of something dark and metallic that caught the lamplight for half a second. The foster mom's breath caught. Ranger hooked the edge of the object with his nose and drew it forward, sliding it across the floor with a soft scrape. It was small, no bigger than a couple fingers. An oval of worn metal with a punched hole at one end, like it once hung from a ring. It looked like a tag, but not like the bright, stamped ID tags shelters used. This one was old, dulled, scratched, the edges smoothed by years of rubbing against something harder. A number had been etched into it, half scratched away as if someone had tried to erase it with a blade. The foster mom reached for it slowly, as if it might bite. Ranger didn't stop her. He watched her hand with calm approval, then flicked his gaze to Corey as if to say, "Pay attention." "That's not ours," Marcy said immediately, voice tight. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "We inventory everything. He didn't come in with that." Corey's frown deepened as he stepped forward. "Maybe it fell in his kennel from—" "No," Marcy cut in, uncharacteristically firm. "I clean those kennels. That has never been there." The foster mom turned the tag over in her palm. The back was scraped more deeply, as though it had been used to pry something open, and in one corner there was a faint imprint, an emblem that might have been a badge or unit mark, worn down almost to nothing. The foster mom's pulse hammered. This wasn't a toy. This wasn't random trash. This was a piece of a life the folder at the desk had tried to erase. Her eyes lifted to Ranger. "Did you bring this?" she whispered, then felt ridiculous. Because dogs didn't keep souvenirs, but Ranger's gaze held hers, steady and knowing. And in that look was a quiet insistence. This matters. The girl's fingers tightened on Ranger's fur, and she whispered, almost to herself, "He had it when he found me." The foster mom's skin prickled. Without thinking, she raised her phone and snapped a photo of the tag in her hand, zooming in on the scratched number, the worn emblem, the hole that suggested it once belonged on a chain. A click, a flash, a record. Corey's eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am, you can't—" "I can," she said, voice low and final. "Because someone already tried to make him disappear on paper." Marcy looked between them, caught between rules and the truth sitting heavy on the floor. Ranger's ears tilted forward again, but this time not toward the hallway, toward the foster mom's phone as it buzzed hard in her hand. One sharp vibration, then another. The screen lit up with a call. Unknown. No caller ID. The foster mom stared at it, throat tightening, then hit answer before fear could talk her out of it. "Hello?" she said. For a second there was only static, a faint hiss like rain on a windshield. Then a breath. Not close enough to be intimate, not far enough to be accidental. The foster mom's heart slammed. "Who is this?" she demanded, voice trembling despite her effort. Silence. Then the line clicked. Dead. She pulled the phone away, staring at the screen, and in the same instant, a text banner slid across it as if the call had been nothing more than a knock on a door. Blocked number. Stop digging. Across town, behind a door with frosted glass and gold lettering that read, "Municipal Services. Authorized personnel only." The air smelled like stale coffee and lemon polish, and the warmth of the adoption center might as well have belonged to another planet. The office was small but curated to feel important. Framed photos of ribbon cuttings, a wall calendar with the town's logo, a shelf of binders labeled in neat block letters. Rain tapped the window here too, softer now, like it didn't want to interrupt. A man sat behind a desk that was too large for the room, leaning back in a padded chair, one hand wrapped around a mug that said, "World's Best Mayor" in playful font. He looked like someone who could shake hands at a parade and remember your name a year later. cheeks ruddy with health, hair combed precisely, smile ready before the other person finished speaking, folksy veneer, polished weakly. "I'm telling you," he said with a sigh that was almost theatrical, "it's just an adoption event. A dog and a kid. We don't need to light the whole town up over feelings." Across from him, perched in a chair like he owned it, was the man in the clean jacket, the friendly stranger. Legs crossed, hands folded, expression calm, eyes carrying that same practiced smile he'd worn in the shelter lobby. The difference here was that he didn't bother pretending he was a good Samaritan. In this room, the mask didn't need as much effort. "Feelings," the stranger repeated, tasting the word like it annoyed him. He set a thin folder on the desk with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate him. "That foster placement is not supposed to be anywhere near that dog." The authority figure, everyone in town called him Mr. Halden, though his title shifted depending on who he was talking to, lifted his brows. "Now hold on. We've managed the placements. We've managed the paperwork. We've managed the transitions." He said transitions like it was a gentle thing, like moving a child from home to man was as easy as relocating a file cabinet. The stranger's smile thinned. "Transitions are only manageable when people don't ask questions." Halden chuckled, trying to soften it. "And nobody's asking questions. It's Maple Hollow, not Washington." The stranger leaned forward a fraction, and the chuckle died in Halden's throat. "Someone is asking now," the stranger said, voice still mild, still polite, but with steel under it. "The foster mom requested the dog's history. Took a photo of something that wasn't supposed to exist. And the girl..." He paused, eyes narrowing as if the idea itself irritated him. The girl recognized him. Halden took a slow sip of coffee, buying time. "Kids make up stories," he offered, returning to the comfort of dismissal. "Trauma brains do funny things. She sees a big shepherd and thinks he's a hero." The stranger tapped the folder once. "He is a hero. That's the problem. That retired K9 was on the scene. He was there. He put eyes on the wrong people doing the wrong thing, and he's trained to remember. Not like a pet. Like a witness that can't be bribed." Halden's smile tried to return and failed halfway. "He's old," he said, softer now. "He's in a shelter. He's practically done." "He's not done," the stranger replied. "He's a liability with teeth and instincts, and a little girl who thinks he's the only safe thing in the world." Halden shifted, uncomfortable, glancing toward the window as if the rain might offer advice. "So, what do you want?" he asked, voice dropping. "We can call the shelter. We can tell them to enforce rules. We keep it small," the stranger said, the words smooth as oil. "We keep it quiet. We keep it buried the way it's been buried." He flipped the folder open with a single motion and slid a page toward Halden. Names, dates, blocks of black ink. "The incident stays old. The girl stays moved. The dog stays unplaced, or placed somewhere that doesn't matter." Halden's jaw tightened. "She's a child," he muttered, as if that fact had just now arrived. The stranger's eyes didn't soften. "She's a problem that walks around with a conscience," he said, "and consciences spread." Halden rubbed his temple, the folksy mask cracking enough to show what lived underneath. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing the power that made him smile so easily in public. "Look," he said, trying once more for casual. "It's a dog adoption. We can handle it. I'll talk to Corey. Tell him to keep the foster mom calm. No scenes. No drama." The stranger stood, straightening his clean jacket with two sharp tugs, the movement controlled and precise. "Calm is not the goal," he said, and his smile returned, thin, practiced, predatory. "Control is." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob, looking back at Halden like a reminder carved into flesh. "Because if that kid bonds with that dog," he said quietly, "we lose control." The text sat on the foster mom's screen like a handprint on glass. "Stop digging." Simple, cold, and somehow louder than any shouted threat. And for a beat, the meet-and-greet room forgot how to breathe. Marcy's face drained of color as she leaned in, reading it twice as if the words might change. Corey's eyes flicked to the phone and then to the hallway, and his posture tightened the way it did when trouble turned official. "That's probably a prank," he said too quickly, voice pitched for normalcy. But his fingers had already reached for the radio clipped at his belt. Ranger watched them all with that same unblinking steadiness. Body still curved around the girl, and the girl herself stared at the foster mom's phone as if she'd expected it. As if threats were just another kind of weather she'd learned to live under. "We're leaving," the foster mom said. Not as a question, not as a request, and she slid the phone into her pocket with a motion that looked calm, but felt like an alarm bell. She reached for the girl's hand. The girl didn't stand right away. She leaned into Ranger's shoulder one more time, lips near his ear, whispering something too soft for adult ears. Ranger's ears twitched in response. Then he rose with measured control, stepping close enough that his flank brushed the girl's leg. Contact, reassurance, before he positioned himself between her and the door. Corey opened his mouth to protest, but the sound of heavy footsteps in the hall cut him off. Two strangers in dark jackets appeared at the doorway, one holding a clipboard stamped with the town seal, the other wearing the kind of stiff expression that pretended to be neutral. "Maple Hollow Adoption Center?" the man with the clipboard asked, voice official, eyes already taking inventory of the room. Corey straightened instantly. "Yes, sir. What's this about?" The clipboard man didn't smile. "Compliance inspection," he said. "Routine." The word routine landed wrong. Even Marcy flinched. Corey's gaze darted to Marcy, then to the foster mom, then, unwillingly, toward the lobby. "We weren't informed," Corey said, trying to sound cooperative. "Inspections are usually scheduled." "Not always," the man replied, and his tone suggested that arguing would be a mistake. Behind them, the lobby noise shifted, families quieting, volunteers whispering, the sudden ripple that moves through a place when authority arrives and everyone wonders if they've done something wrong. The foster mom felt the hairs rise along her arms. Inspections didn't just happen. Not like this. Not right after a blocked call and a warning. "We're in the middle of a meet and greet," Marcy said carefully. "Can we need access now," the second man cut in, stepping farther into the room. His gaze landed on Ranger, then on the girl, then back to Corey. "And that child needs to leave the premises." The foster mom's throat tightened. "Excuse me?" Corey looked trapped, eyes wide, sweat appearing at his hairline. "Ma'am, it might be best if you—" "No," the foster mom said, stepping in front of the girl. "It might be best if you tell me why a routine inspection involves removing a child." The clipboard man's expression remained blank. "For her safety," he said, the words too generic to mean anything. And that was when the man in the clean jacket appeared at the edge of the hallway, slipping into view like he'd been standing just out of sight, waiting for the exact moment the room became crowded with rules. His smile was soft, sympathetic, almost kind. "Hey," he said, voice low, as if he was here to help. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't have to be." The foster mom's stomach dropped. He moved closer, one slow step, hands open in a harmless gesture, eyes fixed on the girl with a familiarity that made the foster mom's skin crawl. "Sweetheart," he said, still gentle, "you've had a big day. Why don't you come with me and we'll get you a snack, okay?" The girl shrank back, fingers clawing at her sleeve, and the foster mom felt fury ignite under her ribs. "Do not speak to her," she snapped. The man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "Ma'am," he murmured, closer now, "you're making this difficult." Ranger moved before anyone finished a sentence. Not fast, precise. He stepped forward and planted himself between the man and the girl, body squared, head level, eyes locked, his presence so controlled it felt like a door closing. The leash went taut in Marcy's hand, not because Ranger pulled wildly, but because he refused to yield an inch. The man in the clean jacket stopped, his friendly mask twitching at the edges as he measured the dog's stance. "Easy," he said, voice still soft, but sharper now, carrying a warning for humans rather than dogs. "That's a retired animal. He's not supposed to be." Ranger's gaze never blinked. He stood like he'd been built for this exact geometry. Threat in front, vulnerable behind, no chaos, no theatrics. Corey tried to laugh weakly. "He's protective," he offered, but nobody laughed with him. The clipboard man shifted, impatience flashing. "Remove the dog," he ordered. Marcy's hands trembled on the leash. "He's calm," she said. "He's not doing anything." "He's interfering," the second man said, stepping closer, and the clean jacket stranger mirrored him, tightening the circle by inches. The foster mom tightened her grip on the girl's hand. The girl's eyes were wide, glassy, and she whispered, "It's him," as if confirming a nightmare. Ranger's body didn't tense into panic. It tightened into certainty, a living bar across the room. When the second man took one more step, too close, too fast, Ranger finally spoke. A low growl rolled out of his chest, deep and controlled, not a snarl, but a professional warning that vibrated in the bones and froze the air mid-motion. Everyone stopped. Even the strangers with the clipboard held still, as if the sound had reminded them that rules didn't matter to teeth. The clean jacket man's smile vanished completely. For one suspended heartbeat, the room was silent except for Ranger's steady breathing and the rain ticking against the window. Then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, and the entire adoption center plunged into darkness. Darkness swallowed the room so fast it felt like the building had been wrapped in a hand. And for a split second, every adult instinct screamed the same word, "Run!" until the emergency lights kicked in with a dull, mechanical click, bathing the meet-and-greet space in a pulsing red glow that made everyone look guilty, even the innocent. The cozy lamp died. The soft corners of the room vanished, and all that remained were silhouettes. Corey's stiff outline at the door, Marcy's hands locked around the leash, the clipboard men shifting like shadows that didn't belong, and Ranger, solid, centered, standing between the girl and the threat, as if the darkness had given him permission to be what he'd always been. In the crimson light, Ranger's eyes seemed darker, deeper, and his body didn't move an inch, only his ears pivoted, tracking sounds beyond the room, measuring distance by footsteps and breath. The lobby outside erupted into confused chatter, children crying, volunteers calling names, someone shouting that the breaker must have tripped. But inside the meet-and-greet space, the sudden hush felt deliberate, like a trap snapping shut. The man in the clean jacket took a half step back instinctively, his hands rising again in that harmless gesture. though now it looked less like kindness and more like calculation. "Let's stay calm," he murmured, voice softer than before, as if calm would make him invisible. Corey cleared his throat, trying to regain authority. "Everyone just hold tight. Maintenance will—" "No," the foster mom cut in, voice low and steady, pulling the girl closer until the child's shoulder pressed into her hip. "Nobody moves her." The clipboard man shifted as if to protest, but Ranger's head turned slightly, gaze pinning him in the red light with a stillness that made words feel risky. For a moment, nobody knew who held power, the officials with the seal, or the retired dog with the posture of a duty-bound guardian. The girl's breathing was shallow, quick, her fingers clamped around the foster mom's sleeve, as if fabric could keep her from being taken. She stared past Ranger at the man in the clean jacket, and tears ran silently down her cheeks, catching the red glow like thin glass. "Sweetheart," the foster mom whispered, forcing her own fear into a tight corner. "Look at me. You're here. You're safe." The girl tried, but her eyes kept sliding back, stuck to the man as if he were a magnet made of terror. Ranger remained between them, chest rising slow, the leash taut but unmoving, a barrier that didn't need walls. Somewhere outside, a door banged, and Ranger's muscles tightened for a heartbeat before settling again, his focus sharpening. The foster mom felt the weight of the earlier text message in her pocket like a stone. "Stop digging." But now, the dark had peeled away the shelter's cheerful costume, and what was left was the truth. Someone wanted this moment contained, controlled, erased. Marcy swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "The generator lights will stay on," she murmured, trying to sound useful. We have a protocol for outages." Corey's laugh came out strangled. Yeah, we'll just—" The girl's voice cut through him, thin but clear, like a thread pulled tight. "It was like this," she said, and the adults froze because it didn't sound like a child talking about lights. It sounded like a child talking about memory. She clung to Ranger's fur now, fingers sunk into his coat, and Ranger leaned his shoulder into her, just enough to let her borrow his steadiness. "Months ago," she whispered, eyes wide and wet, "when it was dark and raining, and the air was cold, I hid under a porch." The foster mom's throat tightened. "Under a porch?" The girl nodded, and in the red glow her face looked older than it should. "They were looking for me," she said, and the word they carried more weight than any name. "I could hear their boots on the boards. I could smell cigarettes. One of them said if I made a sound, they'd take me where nobody would find me." Her voice wavered, and she pressed her forehead to Ranger's neck like she was trying to rewind time into something safer. "I didn't cry," she said, almost proud, almost broken. "I didn't breathe loud. I just stayed small." The foster mom felt ice spread through her chest. "Who were they?" she asked. But the girl shook her head, unable or unwilling to name it, and Ranger's ears flicked toward the hallway as if the name didn't matter, only the scent. "Then I heard something else," the girl continued, and her eyes lifted to Ranger's face. "Not boots, softer, like paws." Ranger's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but he stayed alert, as if even comfort had to be earned cautiously. "He found me," the girl whispered, and her hand trembled as it stroked Ranger's cheek, fingertips tracing the scar on his nose like she'd traced it before. "A police dog. I saw his shadow first. I thought I was going to scream because dogs were supposed to bark, right? Dogs were supposed to tell on you. She let out a shaky breath that sounded like a laugh, trying not to be a sob. But he didn't bark. He didn't scare me. He came under the porch with me like he was my wall. The room held still around her. Even Corey stopped pretending. He pressed against me, the girl said, tears spilling faster now. And he stayed. I could feel his breathing, slow, calm, like he was telling me, "Don't move. I've got you." And when the men came close, when I could see their shoes, he didn't make a sound. Her voice cracked. He just stared. And they walked away. The foster mom's eyes stung, not from sentiment, but from the sickening clarity forming in her mind. "And then?" she prompted gently. The girl swallowed. "Then the good people came," she said. "Lights, voices. They called my name. And the dog stayed pressed against me until a hand reached in and pulled me out." She looked up at the foster mom with a raw honesty that shattered any remaining normal explanations. "He saved me," she whispered. "He was there. He knows." In the red-lit hush, the foster mom's gaze dropped to the worn tag photo on her phone, to the blacked-out paperwork, to the blocked number warning, and then back to Ranger. Retired, dismissed, labeled too intense. Her stomach turned as the unthinkable clicked into place. This wasn't just a miraculous reunion that made strangers tear up at an adoption center. It was a loose thread in a buried story, and someone was yanking hard to keep it from unraveling. Ranger didn't just save the girl then. He was a living witness now, evidence with a heartbeat. And if he had recognized that man in the clean jacket the way he'd recognized the girl, it meant the past hadn't stayed past at all. It had followed them here. And Ranger, silent and unblinking in the emergency glow, was ready to protect her again.